Roger Spencer is our next reader.
So I hope you can hear my voice. It's usually pretty loud anyway, but you're going to have to back up a bit chronologically for this. It's called Flight. Those of you who have watched Downton Abbey are familiar with the New Year celebration of 1925, which ended the final episode. In that year, my mother was just 19, single, and an au pair for a well-to-do family in England. The experience grounded her in the English language, one of 5 she spoke fluently, and made her a lifelong Anglophile. It probably saved her life too, and her husband, her parents, and her children. But I'm getting ahead of my story. In my earliest years, I associated parks and travel with holidays and vacations. We would go to the Schönbrunn Palace Gardens or the Vienna Woods on a weekend afternoon, and to Baden or the Alps for longer vacations. There's snapshots of my sister wearing a dirndl skirt and me in lederhosen, with the mountains in the background, looking very happy. We never expected to have to run for our lives from Vienna and Austria, let alone from Europe to Africa. My mother was the only one in our family who felt this sense of urgency to leave at once or stay where we were and die. The only choices were Palestine, Shanghai, or Tanganyika. She wanted to go to an English-speaking place that, along with Kenya and Uganda, was known as British East Africa. My father didn't want to leave his surgical practice in Vienna or the vicinity of Budapest, where his aging father, older sister, and younger brother lived. And this was in spite of his having been denounced by a patient and detained by the Gestapo, who had raided and ransacked our apartment in Vienna, stealing half of our savings, which were hidden in a cotton ball in my father's medicine cabinet. The other half was still in its hiding place in the hem of a heavy drape where my mother had inserted it and sewed it over. That money paid for our passage out of Austria. All of this had happened after Hitler marched triumphantly into Austria, his birthplace, in March of 1938. My mother could see the handwriting on the wall even before Kristallnacht, which was 6 months off. My father had relatives in New York, but it was too late to start the process and get on the Hungarian quota. My mother was eventually able to get herself, my older sister, and I on the Austrian quota, which was not as long, but it would be 3 years before we could get visas to come to the United States, and even longer for my father. My recollections of our departure from Vienna when I was a little over 4 years old are still vivid. Trieste is not very far from Vienna by train, a day's trip to the southwest, and before World War I it was part of Austria, not Italy. The locomotive taking us there was the largest, loudest, and blackest monster I had ever seen, and very scary when I saw it pull into the station. I remember little about our embarkation on the Duquesa d'Aosta, a smallish steamship that plied the Mediterranean on its way to the Suez Canal and the east coast of Africa. Besides us, it carried only a few passengers, mostly prostitutes on their way to North Africa. They were inspired by Mussolini to perform their patriotic duty with the boys in the Italian army, which was winning the lopsided war against Haile Selassie in Abyssinia. I don't recall much about our stops at Port Suez or Aden. It took perhaps a week or 10 days to reach Mombasa, the largest port on the coast of Kenya, where we disembarked for the 3-day journey by rail to Lake Victoria in the center of Africa. How the town of Mavanza on the southern shore of Lake Victoria got to be our home for the next year is a story in itself, which I won't tell now except to say that a small German colony remained in Tanganyika after the Germans lost World War I, and they were now heading back to Germany, anticipating the beginning of another war. Among them was a doctor Dr. Schuppler, who had been implicated in the murder of the Austrian Chancellor Adolphus by the Nazis in 1934. He had built a small house and medical practice which he now wanted to sell. The house and the yard around it were full of vermin, scorpions, and snakes, and the primitive medical equipment consisted mainly of an unshielded X-ray machine. We slept under mosquito netting, but that didn't prevent us all getting malaria. One vivid memory is of the enormous green and red spiders which made their home on the high ceiling of our bedroom, beyond the reach or concern of any of the natives who did the chores around the house and helped my father with his practice. In the wet season, it would pour rain for weeks, but the rest of the year, it was too sunny and hot for man, woman, or child to go out without a cork helmet. Mango and papaya trees grew in the back and bore delicious fruit. We tried raising chicks, but the snakes and weasels got them first. When a plague of locusts filled the air outside for days so thick they'd get inside your clothes, we stayed indoors while the shirtless natives happily caught and ate them alive or roasted them over a fire. A teenager named Nyanda taught me Swahili. The British colony had a clubhouse where they would show Shirley Temple and Mickey Mouse movies on weekends to all comers. When I wasn't sick with malaria, I learned as much English from these movies as from King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table, which my mother ordered from a correspondence school. It was another year before we moved to Dar es Salaam, where my father was the medical director of the Lady Alicia, or Alice, Aga Khan Maternity Hospital, and my sister and I were enrolled in an Anglo-American school.